In rural Kentucky, 70-year-old mother was about to face the fight of her life. What started as a quiet March morning took a shocking turn when she discovered her husband's abandonment note. Madison Huff wasn't your typical 1950s housewife. For 14 years, she had raised 12 children while mastering her grandmother's secret recipes. When she found Sam's letter claiming he, quote, couldn't handle this anymore, she had no idea she was walking into a battle for survival. Madison's choice to fight rather than surrender would transform her into an unstoppable force. What began as devastating betrayal would become the birth of a matriarch who built an empire from determination alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Madison's hands trembled as she smoothed the paper for the fourth time, as if her touch could somehow change the words scrawled in Sam's familiar handwriting. The kitchen clock ticked past 6 in the morning, each second marking another moment in a world that had fundamentally shifted beneath her feet. $17.32. That's what remained of their savings account. She'd counted the bills twice, spread them across the same table where she'd served thousands of family meals. 14 years of marriage. 12 children. Gone with a note that took less than 10 seconds to read. The house creaked around her, filled with the soft breathing of sleeping children who had no idea their father had chosen abandonment over responsibility. Ruby would wake soon for school. Then Jimmy with his endless questions about everything. The cascade would begin. Maggie helping with the little ones. Tommy lost in whatever world his artistic mind conjured. Katie with her fearless chatter. And the younger children needing everything from clean clothes to breakfast. Madison pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself to find some reserve of strength she wasn't sure existed. The woman who had married Sam at 18 had been sheltered, dependent, grateful for a man who promised to take care of everything. That woman had believed in fairy tales and happy endings. That woman was as dead as yesterday's dreams. Footsteps on the stairs announced Ruby's approach. At 16, her eldest daughter moved with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to navigate around sleeping siblings. But Madison could hear the worry in her gait. Ruby had always been too observant, too willing to shoulder burdens that should never touch a child's shoulders. "Mama?" Ruby's voice carried down the stairs, followed by the soft padding of bare feet on worn wood. "Where's Daddy's truck?" The question hit Madison like a physical blow. She folded the note quickly, shoving it into her apron pocket as Ruby appeared in the doorway. Her daughter's dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, Sam's eyes, swept the kitchen with sharp intelligence. "He had to leave early," Madison said, the lie tasting like ash on her tongue. She moved to the stove with practiced efficiency, her hands reaching for the coffee pot even as her mind reeled. Normal. She had to maintain normal. Ruby didn't move from the doorway. His lunch pail's still here. Madison's heart hammered against her ribs. "He had a meeting. Out of town." "Mama." Ruby's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "You've been crying." Before Madison could answer, Jimmy's voice boomed from upstairs, followed by the thunder of adolescent feet on the stairs. At 14, he'd inherited Sam's broad shoulders and quick temper, but none of his father's weakness. Madison prayed that would always be true. "Morning!" Jimmy burst into the kitchen with characteristic energy, his hair defying gravity at impossible angles. "Is Dad still sleeping?" I wanted to ask him about. He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze moving between Madison's face and Ruby's tense posture. "What's wrong?" Baby Sarah's cries drifted down from upstairs, soon joined by 2-year-old Danny's voice calling for his mama. The morning routine was beginning whether Madison was ready or not. 12 children depending on her to hold their world together while hers crumbled around her. "Ruby, please get Sarah." "Jimmy, wake the others gently." Madison's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Breakfast in 20 minutes." The older children exchanged glances. A wordless communication that spoke of shared burdens and unspoken fears. They obeyed. But Madison could feel their questions hanging in the air like smoke from a dying fire. She moved through the motions of breakfast preparation with mechanical precision. Oatmeal for the little ones, toast for the older children, coffee strong enough to keep her standing. Each familiar task felt like moving through deep water, every motion requiring conscious effort. One by one, the children filtered into the kitchen. Maggie, 12 and already showing signs of the beauty she'd inherit, helped corral the younger ones into their seats. Tommy, 10 and lost in his own artistic world, sat sketching in the margins of yesterday's newspaper. Katie, 8 and fearless, announced she'd lost another tooth. Patty, Bobby, Lizzie. The middle children settled into their usual spots with the comfortable chaos of a large family. Sam's empty chair at the head of the table seemed to mock every promise he'd ever made. "Where's Daddy?" Katie asked around a mouthful of toast, her gap-toothed grin fading as she looked around the table. Madison's throat tightened. He had business to take care of. "What kind of business?" Katie pressed, because Katie always pressed. "Eat your breakfast, sweetheart." The questions kept coming. From Katie, from 6-year-old Patty, from 5-year-old Bobby, who wanted to know if Daddy would be home for lunch. Each innocent inquiry was like a small blade turning in Madison's chest. Ruby and Jimmy remained silent, but their eyes never left her face. They knew something fundamental had shifted. After breakfast, as the children scattered to prepare for school, Madison found herself staring out at the garden Sam had promised to expand this spring. The soil lay dark and ready for planting, but the hands that had made those promises were gone. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. Through the lace curtains, she could see Mr. Henderson, their landlord. Madison's stomach plummeted. If Sam had left the note, if he'd taken the money, what else had he left undone? "Mrs. Huff?" Henderson's voice carried the kind of reluctant authority that meant trouble. "I need to speak with you about the rent." Madison dried her hands on her apron, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward whatever fresh disaster awaited. As she reached for the door handle, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, but still standing. "Mr. Henderson," she said, opening the door. "What can I do for you?" His expression was uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Huff, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a problem. The rent hasn't been paid in 3 months. Samuel promised me it was just temporary, that he had a big deal coming through, but 3 months. Sam had been lying for 3 months, promising Henderson money they didn't have, while Madison believed they were barely scraping by but managing. The depth of his deception hit her like a physical blow. "How much?" she asked quietly. $240, plus this month's $80. $320 total. $320. She had $17.32. "I can give you until the end of the week," Henderson continued, his voice gentler now. "I know this ain't your fault, Madison. Everyone knows Sam's been struggling. But I got my own family to think about." Behind her, she could hear the children getting ready for school, their voices a reminder of everything she stood to lose. Ruby appeared at her shoulder, having heard enough to understand the gravity of the situation. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Madison said. "I'll have your money." She had no idea how, but she would. Because the alternative, losing the house, scattering her children, was unthinkable. After Henderson left, Madison found herself sitting in the small sanctuary of St. Mary's Catholic Church, her hands folded in her lap as she stared at the wooden cross above the altar. She'd never been particularly religious, but desperation had a way of driving people to their knees. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the empty church. "I don't know how to do this alone." Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When life backs you into a corner, you got 2 choices, girl. You can curl up and die, or you can come out swinging." Grandma Eleanor had raised Madison after her parents died, working 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed. She'd been fierce, unbreakable, a woman who'd carved out a life through sheer determination. Madison had always thought she was different, softer, content to let Sam handle the difficult decisions. "Mrs. Huff?" Madison turned to find Reverend O'Brien standing in the aisle, his kind eyes filled with concern. He was a young priest, maybe 35, with calloused hands that spoke of a life lived before the cloth. "Reverend," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. "I heard about Sam," he said gently. sliding into the pew beside her. "I'm sorry." Madison nodded, not trusting her voice. "You know," O'Brien continued, "I've been in this parish for 8 years. I've seen families face impossible situations. The ones who survive aren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They're the ones who refuse to give up." "I don't know how to take care of 12 children alone," Madison whispered. "You don't have to figure it all out today," he said. "Just today. Just this moment. What do you need right now?" Madison thought of Henderson's ultimatum, of the empty pantry, of Ruby's worried eyes and Jimmy's confused anger. "Everything." O'Brien smiled sadly. "Then we start with something. One thing. What's one thing you can do today that moves you forward?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, thinking of her grandmother's hands kneading bread, of the recipes passed down through generations, of the way food had always been love in their family. "I can cook," she said finally. "My grandmother taught me. I can cook." "Then that's where we start," O'Brien said. "Everything else will follow." As Madison walked home through the crisp March air, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something harder and more valuable. The will to fight. Her children were counting on her, and she would not let them down. The first battle was about to begin, and Madison Huff intended to win. But as she walked through her front door, the weight of O'Brien's words still echoing in her mind, she found her resolve tested by the sight of a sleek, black Cadillac parked in her driveway. Ida Mae Huff sat in the passenger seat like a queen surveying a peasant village, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the March wind. Beside her, a man in an expensive suit shuffled through a stack of papers. Madison's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She recognized the predatory patience in their posture. They'd been waiting. "Mrs. Huff?" The man emerged from the driver's side, his voice carrying the kind of smooth authority that came with law degrees and retainer fees. "I'm Harold Brennan, attorney for Mrs. Ida Mae Huff. We need to discuss the welfare of the children." Madison's hands clenched at her sides. Through the front window, she could see Ruby's face pressed against the glass, her expression tight with worry. Jimmy stood behind his sister, his jaw set in a way that reminded Madison painfully of Sam at that age, before weakness had carved lines around his eyes. "The children are fine," Madison said, her voice steadier than she felt. "They're with their mother, where they belong." Ida Mae finally deigned to exit the Cadillac, her movements deliberate and theatrical. At 63, Sam's mother still carried herself like the society belle she'd been in her youth, when the Huff family money had meant something in Louisville. That money was long gone, gambled away by Sam's father and frittered away by Sam himself. But Ida Mae clung to the pretense of superiority, like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. "Madison, dear," Ida Mae's voice dripped with false concern. "You poor thing. I know this must be overwhelming for you. 12 children, no income, no husband to provide stability." "Samuel chose to leave," Madison replied, each word carefully measured. "That doesn't make me unfit." Brennan stepped forward, his briefcase snapping open with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Huff, I'm afraid the situation is more complex than you realize. We have documentation of significant financial irregularities, failure to maintain adequate housing standards, and evidence that the children have been neglected while you've been pursuing other interests." "Other interests?" Madison's voice carried a dangerous edge that made Ruby step away from the window. "Taking care of my family is not an interest, Mr. Brennan. It's my life." "Gambling debts," Ida Mae said quietly, the words dropping between them like stones into still water. $17,000, Madison. Did you know about the gambling debts?" The number hit Madison like a physical blow. $17,000. More money than she'd seen in her entire life, owed to people who didn't forgive or forget. No wonder Sam had run. No wonder he'd emptied their account and fled like a thief in the night. "I can see from your expression that you didn't," Brennan continued, his tone almost gentle. "Mrs. Huff, these debts have been accumulated over the past 2 years. Some of them are held by individuals who aren't particularly patient about collection. The children could be in danger." Madison felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, But she forced herself to remain standing. Behind the lawyer's words, she could hear the real threat. Take the children away from the dangerous poor woman. Give them to the respectable grandmother who could provide stability, even if that stability came wrapped in bitterness and conditional love. "What do you want?" Madison asked. "Temporary custody," Ida May said, stepping closer. "Until you can get back on your feet. The older ones can continue school in Louisville. The younger ones will have proper care, adequate nutrition, medical attention when needed. It's really the most sensible solution." Through the window, Madison could see more of her children gathering. Maggie held baby Sarah, her 12-year-old face creased with worry. Tommy clutched his sketchbook like a shield. Katie stood with her hands on her hips, probably preparing to march outside and demand answers in her fearless 8-year-old way. These weren't just children to be managed and provided for. They were her heart walking around outside her body, each one a piece of her soul shaped by love and sacrifice. The thought of watching them driven away in Ida May's Cadillac made something fierce and primal rise up in Madison's chest. "No," she said quietly. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Huff, perhaps you don't understand the gravity of your situation. Without immediate financial assistance, you'll lose the house within days. The children will have no shelter, no food, no stability. Is your pride really worth their suffering?" "This isn't about pride," Madison replied, her voice gaining strength. "This is about family. These children have already been abandoned by one parent. I won't let them lose the other." Ida May's mask of concern slipped, revealing the steel beneath. "You're being selfish, Madison. You always were. Sam would still be here if you'd been the kind of wife he needed instead of a burden he had to carry." The words were designed to cut, and they found their mark. For a moment, Madison felt 14 years of accumulated doubts and insecurities rise up to choke her. Maybe Ida May was right. Maybe if she'd been prettier, smarter, more supportive, Sam wouldn't have turned to gambling and other women. Maybe she was being selfish, keeping the children with her when Ida May could give them things she never could. Then she heard Jimmy's voice from inside the house, patient and gentle as he helped 2-year-old Danny with his shoes. She heard Maggie singing softly to baby Sarah, heard Katie's laughter as she played with Bobby and Lizzie. These children weren't burdens to be managed. They were a family, bound together by something stronger than money or social standing. "Mr. Brennan," Madison said, her voice carrying a new authority that made both visitors take a step back. "I want you to understand something very clearly. These are my children. I've fed them, clothed them, sat up with them through fevers and nightmares and growing pains. I've taught them to read and tie their shoes and say their prayers. They are not possessions to be redistributed based on financial convenience." "Madison," Ida May started. "Mrs. Huff," Madison interrupted, the formal address deliberate. "You raised a son who abandoned his family rather than face his responsibilities. If that's the kind of stability you're offering my children, they're better off with me." Brennan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Huff, emotion aside, the court will want to see evidence of your ability to provide adequate care. That means stable housing, consistent income, proper supervision. Without those things, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Then I'll get those things," Madison said simply. "How?" Ida May's voice was sharp with triumph. "You have no job, no education, no prospects. What could you possibly do to support 12 children?" Madison thought of Reverend O'Brien's words, of her grandmother's hands kneading bread, of the way food had always been love in her family. She thought of the compliments she'd received over the years, the way neighbors had praised her cooking, the requests for her to bring dishes to church socials and community gatherings. "I can cook," she said quietly, "and I can work harder than anyone you know." Ida May laughed, the sound brittle and cruel. "Cooking? Madison, this isn't 1890. You can't support 12 children by taking in laundry and baking pies." "Watch me," Madison replied. Brennan shuffled his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Mrs. Huff, we'll be filing preliminary custody papers tomorrow. You'll have a chance to respond, but I strongly advise you to consider what's truly best for the children." As the Cadillac pulled away, Madison stood in her driveway watching until it disappeared around the bend. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the porch railing, the full weight of what she'd just committed to settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Ruby appeared beside her, having slipped out while Madison was distracted. "Mama? What's gonna happen to us?" Madison looked at her eldest daughter, this girl who'd already given up so much, who worked at the store instead of focusing on her studies, who helped raise her siblings without complaint. Ruby deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt, but she'd never once complained or asked for more. "We're gonna fight," Madison said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "And we're going to win." "How?" Madison thought of the empty pantry, the unpaid rent, the $17,000 in gambling debts that hung over their heads like a sword. She thought of Ida May's certainty that she would fail, of Brennan's professional skepticism, of Sam's note claiming he couldn't handle this anymore. Then she thought of her grandmother's voice. "When life backs you into a corner, you got two choices, girl. You can curl up and die, or you can come out swinging." "I don't know yet," Madison admitted, "but we will." As they walked back into the house together, Madison felt something crystallize in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something harder and more valuable. The absolute certainty that she would do whatever it took to keep her family together. The war for her children's future had begun, and Madison Huff intended to win every battle. The war for her children's future had begun, and Madison Huff intended to win every battle. But as she stood in her kitchen 2 weeks later, staring at the nearly empty pantry shelves, victory felt as distant as the moon. The legal papers sat on the kitchen table like a ticking bomb. Ida May's custody petition, scheduled for a hearing in 10 days. Madison's hands trembled as she reached for her grandmother's old recipe box, its wooden corners worn smooth by decades of use. Inside, yellowed index cards bore Eleanor's careful handwriting, each recipe a small piece of family history. Buttermilk biscuits, light as clouds. Sunday gravy, use the drippings, never waste. Apple butter, patience is the secret ingredient. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to feed her family with recipes passed down from a woman who'd raised her alone during the Depression, who'd made miracles from scraps and determination. If Eleanor could do it then, Madison could do it now. "Mama?" Ruby appeared in the doorway, her school books clutched against her chest. At 16, she moved with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to read a room's temperature instantly. "Mrs. Chen's here to see you." Madison's stomach clenched. Dorothy Chen owned the small diner on Main Street, and in a town where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, her visit could only mean one thing: word of the custody battle had spread. Madison braced herself for another lecture about accepting reality, about doing what was best for the children. But when Mrs. Chen entered the kitchen, her expression wasn't judgmental. It was curious, almost hopeful. The 60-year-old Chinese woman had immigrated to Kentucky 15 years ago with her husband, facing prejudice and suspicion until their hard work and Dorothy's exceptional cooking had won over even the most stubborn locals. "Madison," Dorothy said in her careful English, still touched with the accent that marked her as an outsider to some. "I hear things. About Samuel. About the troubles." Madison nodded stiffly. "I suppose everyone has. My husband, he left me once too," Dorothy continued, settling into the kitchen chair without invitation. "Back in California before we come here. He said I was too proud, too stubborn, said I would never fit in America." This was news to Madison. Everyone in town knew the Chens as a devoted couple who'd built their business together. The idea that Dorothy had faced abandonment seemed impossible. "What did you do?" Madison asked despite herself. "I cooked," Dorothy said simply. "Was only thing I knew how to do. Made dumplings, sold them on street corner for nickels. People said Chinese food was strange, wouldn't sell. But hunger is universal language, yes? Good food speaks to everyone." Madison felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but recognition. Two women, two different worlds, but the same fundamental truth. When everything else falls apart, you work with what you have. "I smell something today," Dorothy continued, glancing toward the stove where Madison had been experimenting with her grandmother's biscuit recipe. trying to stretch the last of their flour into something that would fill 12 hungry bellies. "Come from your kitchen this morning." Made me remember my own grandmother's cooking, back in Canton. Madison flushed. She'd opened the windows to let out the heat, never thinking that the aroma would carry to the street. "Just biscuits. Nothing special. May I?" Dorothy gestured toward the cooling pan. With growing embarrassment, Madison cut a small piece of biscuit and handed it over. The recipe was simple: flour, buttermilk, a touch of lard, and the technique her grandmother had drilled into her hands until it became muscle memory. Light touch, don't overwork the dough, hot oven, and patience. Dorothy bit into the biscuit, and her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, thoughtfully, then took another bite. "This is very good. Very, very good. The texture." She searched for words. "Like clouds, but with substance. And the flavor, complex but not complicated." "It's my grandmother's recipe," Madison said quietly. "Your grandmother was wise, woman." Dorothy set down the biscuit and leaned forward. "Madison, I have proposition for you. My diner, it does good business, but breakfast is weak. People want American food in morning, not Chinese. I try to make biscuits, but—" She shrugged eloquently. "Not the same. Customers notice." Madison's heart began to pound. "What are you suggesting?" "You make biscuits for me. And gravy. I taste your gravy once at church social. Was excellent. I pay you fair price, you keep children fed while you figure out next step." The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Madison's first instinct was pride, the same fierce independence that had made her refuse Ida May's custody offer. She wasn't a charity case. She could take care of her own family. But then she thought of baby Sarah's formula running low, of the notice from the electric company, of the way Tommy had been listlessly pushing food around his plate because there wasn't enough to satisfy his growing boy's appetite. "How much?" Madison asked quietly. 50 biscuits every morning, Monday through Saturday. Plus gravy, 5 quarts. I pay you $5 a day. $5 a day. $30 a week. More money than Madison had ever controlled in her life. Not enough to solve all their problems, but enough to buy time, to keep the lights on, to put food on the table while she figured out the next step. "When would you need me to start?" "Tomorrow, if possible. Breakfast rush starts at 6. You bring food at 5:30? Still warm?" Madison thought of waking at 3 in the morning, of mixing dough in the dark while her children slept, of loading her grandmother's recipes into service as weapons in the war for her family's survival. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Dorothy smiled, the first genuine warmth Madison had seen from anyone outside her family since Sam left. "Good. We try for 1 week. See how it goes. If customers like, we continue. If not—" She shrugged. "No harm done." After Dorothy left, Madison stood alone in her kitchen, staring at the recipe box with new eyes. These weren't just instructions for making food. They were blueprints for independence, for dignity, for proving that love could be translated into something tangible and valuable. She pulled out the card for her grandmother's famous sausage gravy, reading Eleanor's careful notes in the margin. "Cook the flour long enough to lose the raw taste, but don't let it brown. Milk must be warm, or it will curdle. Season with patience and love. Folks can taste the difference." Madison had made this gravy 1,000 times for her own family, but tomorrow she would make it for strangers who would pay for the privilege. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Mama?" Ruby appeared again, this time with Jimmy behind her. Both teenagers wore expressions of careful hope, as if they were afraid to believe this might be the beginning of something better. "I'm going to be cooking for Mrs. Chen's diner," Madison said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Starting tomorrow." That's good, right?" Jimmy asked. "I mean, it's money?" "It's a start," Madison replied. She looked at her 2 oldest children, these young people who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd shouldered responsibilities that should have been hers alone. "It's going to mean early mornings and long days. I'll need help with the little ones." "You've got it," Ruby said immediately. "Whatever you need, Jimmy added. Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. Not tears of despair this time, but something else entirely. These children, her children, were ready to fight alongside her. They understood that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that they belonged together, that love and determination could triumph over money and social position. That night, Madison set her alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning. As she lay in bed listening to the house settle around her sleeping children, she thought of her grandmother's voice. When life backs you into a corner, you got 2 choices, girl. You can curl up and die, or you can come out swinging. Tomorrow she would start swinging. With flour and buttermilk and the recipes of a woman who'd never known defeat, Madison Huff would begin building the foundation of their new life. The custody hearing was still 8 days away, but for the first time since finding Sam's note, Madison felt something that might actually be hope. The custody hearing was still 8 days away, but for the first time since finding Sam's note, Madison felt something that might actually be hope. That hope was tested at 4:30 in the morning when her alarm shrieked through the darkness for the 20th consecutive day, and her body protested every movement as she dragged herself from bed to begin another day of what had become their new routine. 3 months. 3 months since Sam's abandonment, and Madison's partnership with Mrs. Chen had evolved into something neither woman had expected. What started as 50 biscuits and 5 quarts of gravy had expanded to include cornbread, dinner rolls, and Madison's legendary apple butter. The diner's breakfast business had doubled, with customers driving from neighboring towns just to taste what folks were calling the best biscuits this side of Louisville. But success came with a price that Madison felt in her bones every morning, as she kneaded dough in the pre-dawn darkness. Her hands, once soft from 14 years of housework, now bore permanent flour stains and small burns from the oven. Her back ached from hunching over mixing bowls, and exhaustion had become her constant companion. "Mama, you're pushing too hard," Ruby said softly, appearing in the kitchen doorway like a ghost. At 16, her eldest daughter had become Madison's shadow, waking early to help with the baking before school, staying up late to help with the younger children. The cost of their survival was written in the dark circles under Ruby's eyes, in the way she moved through her days with the careful efficiency of someone much older. "We don't have a choice," Madison replied, her hands never pausing in their rhythmic kneading. "The Johnsons' anniversary party is this weekend. 50 people. And they specifically requested my dinner rolls." "That's wonderful, Mama, but when's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Madison didn't answer because they both knew the truth. Sleep had become a luxury they couldn't afford. Between the pre-dawn baking, the daily deliveries, managing the household, and caring for 12 children, there simply weren't enough hours in the day. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Jimmy's arrival. At 14, he'd grown 3 inches in the past months, his body stretching upward even as his responsibilities multiplied. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair disheveled but already reaching for his jacket. "Ready for deliveries?" he asked, stifling a yawn. Madison nodded toward the loaded baskets lined up on the counter. "Chen's first. Then the Johnsons want 24 dinner rolls for their dinner party planning meeting, and Mrs. Patterson ordered a dozen biscuits for her bridge club." Jimmy loaded the baskets into the wagon Sam had built 2 summers ago for hauling firewood. The irony wasn't lost on Madison, using something Sam had created to build the independence his abandonment had forced upon them. As Jimmy headed out into the gray, pre-dawn light, Madison heard baby Sarah crying upstairs. 6 months old now, Sarah had never known her father, and sometimes Madison wondered if that was a blessing. The baby's cries were quickly joined by 2-year-old Danny's voice calling for his mama. "I'll get them," Ruby said, already moving toward the stairs. "Ruby, you need to get ready for school." "I can miss first period," Mr. Henderson said. "No." Madison's voice carried a firmness that made Ruby stop mid-step. "You will not miss school. Not for anything. Education is the only thing that will give you choices I never had." The truth hung between them, unspoken but understood. Ruby was 17 in 6 months. Smart enough for college, if they could find a way to pay for it. But every day she spent managing household crises was a day she wasn't focusing on her studies, wasn't preparing for a future beyond these kitchen walls. The morning routine unfolded with the choreographed precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Maggie, at 12, had become the family's second-in-command, helping the younger children dress and organizing breakfast with the quiet efficiency that ran in their family. Tommy, 10 and still dreamy, had learned to sketch while supervising toddlers, his artistic talents adapted to the practical needs of survival. But it was 8-year-old Katie who worried Madison most. Once fearless and outspoken, Katie had grown quiet in recent weeks, her bright chatter replaced by a watchful silence that seemed too old for her years. "Katie, sweetheart, are you feeling all right?" Madison asked as she packed lunch pails for the school-aged children. "I'm fine, Mama." Katie's response was automatic, but her eyes didn't meet Madison's. Before Madison could press further, a sharp knock at the front door interrupted the morning routine. Through the window, she could see a familiar figure in a dark coat. Not Ida May this time, but someone equally unwelcome. Harold Brennan, the lawyer, stood on her porch with his ever-present briefcase and an expression that promised fresh complications. "Mrs. Huff," Brennan said when Madison opened the door. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning routine." "What do you want, Mr. Brennan?" Madison kept her voice level, but behind her she could feel her children's attention sharpen. They'd learned to recognize the particular tension that accompanied visits from lawyers and landlords. "I wanted to discuss the upcoming hearing. I've been reviewing your case and I have some concerns about the sustainability of your current arrangements." Madison stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her to keep the conversation away from young ears. "My arrangements are working fine." "Are they?" Brennan's tone was professionally skeptical. "Mrs. Huff, I've done some investigation into your business relationship with Mrs. Chen. While I applaud your initiative, the income you're generating is barely adequate for a family of your size. And there are other concerns, such as, your eldest daughter has missed 12 days of school this semester. Your son James was involved in a fight last week defending your family's reputation. The younger children show signs of stress that suggest inadequate supervision." Each accusation hit Madison like a physical blow because each contained a grain of truth she'd been trying to ignore. Ruby was struggling to balance school with family responsibilities. Jimmy had come home with a black eye after confronting classmates who'd made jokes about their father's abandonment. And the little ones, God help her, she'd been so focused on keeping them fed and housed that she'd barely noticed the subtle changes in their behavior. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, "Mrs. Ida May Huff has expressed willingness to provide full college scholarships for the older children, proper medical care for all of them, and the kind of stability that comes with established financial resources." "In exchange for what?" Madison asked quietly. "Custody. Not permanent, temporary, until you can demonstrate sustained financial stability and adequate support systems." Madison looked through the window at her children, gathered around the kitchen table for breakfast. Maggie was helping Danny with his oatmeal, while keeping one eye on baby Sarah. Tommy was showing Katie something in his sketchbook, trying to coax a smile from her serious little face. Ruby was braiding Lizzie's hair while simultaneously organizing schoolbooks and lunch pails. They were a family. Imperfect, struggling, held together by love and determination, rather than money and social position. But they were hers, and she was theirs, and no amount of financial security was worth breaking those bonds. "Mr. Brennan," Madison said, turning back to face the lawyer, "I want you to understand something very clearly. These children are not negotiation chips in some custody game. They're my family. And families stick together, especially when times are hard. Mrs. Huff, I admire your determination, but the court will want to see more than maternal devotion. They'll want evidence of long-term stability, educational opportunities, proper supervision. Then I'll provide that evidence. How?" Madison thought of the orders piling up, of the compliments from customers, of Mrs. Chen's suggestion that they expand beyond breakfast. By building something that lasts. By proving that love and hard work can create stability just as surely as inherited money. As Brennan drove away, Madison stood on her porch watching her children head off to school. Ruby walked with the measured pace of someone carrying too much responsibility. Jimmy's shoulders were set with determination that reminded her painfully of her own stubborn streak. The younger children chattered and laughed, their resilience a daily miracle that kept Madison fighting when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The custody hearing was 5 days away. 5 days to prove that their unconventional family could thrive despite the odds. 5 days to demonstrate that sometimes the greatest strength came from the most unexpected places. Madison Huff had work to do. Madison Huff had work to do. But as she stood in the courthouse hallway 5 days later, watching Ida Mae Huff emerge from a black Cadillac wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Madison's family spent on groceries in 3 months, she wondered if all her work would be enough. The Warren County Courthouse smelled of old wood and nervous sweat, its marble floors echoing with the footsteps of people whose lives hung in the balance. Madison smoothed her best dress, a simple gray wool that she'd worn to Sam's cousin's wedding 2 years ago, and tried to project the confidence she didn't feel. "Mama." Ruby appeared at her elbow, beautiful in her church dress, her dark hair pinned back with the careful precision of someone determined to look older than her 16 years. "Are you ready?" Madison looked at her eldest daughter, this young woman who'd sacrificed her own dreams to help hold their family together, and felt her resolve crystallize. "We're all ready." The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of preparation. Character witnesses lined up through Reverend O'Brien's networking. Financial records organized with Mrs. Chen's help. School reports gathered, medical records updated, house cleaned until it gleamed. Madison had even managed to convince Ruby to return to full-time school attendance, though it meant Madison was working 18-hour days to cover the gap. "Mrs. Huff?" A young man in a cheap suit approached them. "I'm David Walsh, the court-appointed advocate for the children. I'd like to speak with you before we begin." Madison's stomach clenched. She'd been told about the advocate, a recent law school graduate whose job was to represent the children's best interests, regardless of what the adults wanted. "Mr. Walsh," she said, extending her hand, "I appreciate you taking the time to visit our home last week." Walsh had spent 3 hours at their house, interviewing each child separately, observing their interactions, taking notes in a small black book that seemed to catalog every imperfection in their lives. Madison had watched his eyes linger on the patched furniture, the hand-me-down clothes, the overcrowded bedrooms where children shared not just beds but dreams and fears in equal measure. "Mrs. Huff, I want you to know that I've rarely seen children who are more articulate about their family situation. Your older children, particularly Ruby and James, made very compelling cases for keeping the family together. But," Madison heard the unspoken reservation in his voice, "but the court's primary concern is the children's welfare. Mrs. Ida Mae Huff can offer educational opportunities, financial security, individual attention that would be difficult to provide in your current circumstances." Before Madison could respond, Harold Brennan approached with Ida Mae in tow. Sam's mother looked every inch the respectable widow, hair perfectly styled, jewelry understated but expensive, an air of composed dignity that spoke of generations of social position. "Madison, dear," Ida Mae said, her voice carrying false warmth, "you look, well, considering everything you've been through." Madison noticed Ruby stiffen beside her, recognizing the subtle insult wrapped in apparent concern. "Mrs. Huff, I hope you're prepared to hear some truths today." "Oh, I think we'll hear plenty of truths," Ida Mae replied smoothly. "About responsibility, about what children need to thrive, about the difference between good intentions and actual capability." The courtroom itself was smaller than Madison had expected, wood-paneled and formal, with tall windows that let in the gray October light. Judge Harrison presided from behind an imposing bench, his weathered face giving no indication of his thoughts as the lawyers presented their opening statements. Brennan spoke first, painting a picture of Madison as a well-meaning but overwhelmed woman, whose pride was endangering her children's welfare. He cited statistics about childhood poverty, educational achievement gaps, the importance of stability and resources. "Your Honor," Brennan concluded, "while we don't question Mrs. Madison Huff's love for her children, love alone cannot provide the foundation these young people need to reach their full potential." Madison's lawyer, a tired-looking man named George Hartwell who'd taken her case for a fraction of his usual fee, countered with testimonials about family bonds, about the children's academic achievements despite their circumstances, about Madison's transformation from dependent wife to successful businesswoman. Mrs. Huff has not merely survived abandonment and financial ruin, Hartwell argued. She has used these challenges as opportunities to demonstrate remarkable resilience and resourcefulness. Her children haven't just been fed and housed. They've been taught by example that determination and hard work can overcome any obstacle. Then came the witnesses. Reverend O'Brien testified about Madison's character, about the family's regular church attendance, about the way the children looked out for each other with a maturity that spoke of strong values rather than neglect. Mrs. Chen took the stand next, her carefully precise English carrying absolute conviction. Mrs. Huff is most reliable person I know in business. Her cooking brings customers from 3 counties. More important, she teaches children responsibility, family loyalty. In China we say, rich family with no love is poor family. Poor family with love is rich family. But it was Ruby's testimony that changed the temperature in the room. At 16, she spoke with a poise that belied her years, her voice steady as she described their daily routine, their system of shared responsibilities, the way Madison had transformed from grieving wife to family leader. Your Honor, Ruby said, her eyes meeting Judge Harrison's directly, my grandmother seems to think that money equals love, that expensive schools and individual bedrooms would make us happier. But she's wrong. We take care of each other because Mama taught us that family means showing up, especially when things are hard. My father left when we needed him most. Mama stayed and fought for us. That's the difference between real love and convenience. Brennan's cross-examination was gentle but pointed. Miss Huff, don't you want the opportunities that your grandmother could provide? College without debt? Professional prospects? A chance to build your own life instead of raising your siblings? Ruby was quiet for a long moment, and Madison held her breath. This was the heart of it. The question that had haunted Madison through sleepless nights. Was she being selfish, holding her children back from opportunities she could never provide? Mr. Brennan, Ruby said finally, you're asking me to choose between my dreams and my family. But Mama's teaching us that we don't have to make that choice. That we can have both if we're willing to work for them. That's worth more than any trust fund. Then Jimmy took the stand, his 14-year-old swagger replaced by serious dignity. My father taught me that when things get tough, you run away. My mother's teaching me that when things get tough, you get tougher. I know which lesson I want to keep. But it was the moment when Sam himself walked into the courtroom that Madison felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her husband, former husband, she corrected herself, looked older, thinner, his charm dimmed by months of whatever life he'd built away from them. The children's reactions were immediate and telling. The older ones' faces hardened with hurt and anger, while the younger ones looked confused, uncertain whether to run toward or away from this man who'd once been the center of their world. Your Honor, Sam said when called to testify, his voice carrying the same hollow confidence that had preceded every broken promise. I want what's best for my children, and I know now that I'm not capable of providing it. Madison's a good woman, but she's in over her head. My mother can give them stability, education, opportunities I never could. The words hit Madison like physical blows, but it was the look in her children's eyes that nearly broke her. Sam wasn't just abandoning them again, he was publicly declaring them too much trouble, too expensive, too difficult for love. When Madison finally took the stand herself, she felt the weight of 12 lives pressing on her shoulders. This was it, her chance to prove that love could triumph over money, that family bonds were stronger than social expectations. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 6 months ago, I was a different woman, dependent, sheltered, defined by my husband's choices rather than my own. When Sam left, I had to decide who I was going to become. I chose to become the mother my children deserved, not perfect, not wealthy, but present. Always present. She looked directly at Ida May as she continued. Mrs. Huff believes that money equals security, that prestigious schools guarantee success. But my children are learning something more valuable than social position. They're learning that families fight for each other, that hard work creates its own dignity, that love isn't something you inherit, it's something you choose, every single day. Madison's voice grew stronger as she spoke about their daily routines, their shared responsibilities, their dreams and fears, and the thousand small moments that made them a family. She talked about Ruby's academic achievements despite working to help support them, about Jimmy's protective instincts channeled into responsible leadership, about the younger children's resilience and joy in the face of uncertainty. "Your Honor, I can't promise my children trust funds or Ivy League educations, but I can promise them something more valuable, a family that will never abandon them, no matter how difficult life becomes. That's not just what I'm offering them. That's what they're already giving each other." When she stepped down from the witness stand, Madison caught sight of her children lined up in the gallery. 12 faces looking back at her, with expressions ranging from Ruby's proud determination to baby Sarah's innocent wonder. Whatever Judge Harrison decided, Madison knew she'd already won the only victory that mattered. She'd become the mother they deserved. She'd become the mother they deserved. Judge Harrison's ruling echoed in Madison's mind as she stood in her kitchen 3 weeks later, watching Sam hover uncertainly in the doorway like a stranger seeking permission to enter his former home. "The court finds no evidence of neglect or inadequate care," the judge had declared. "Mrs. Madison Huff has demonstrated remarkable resilience and resourcefulness in providing for her children's physical, emotional, and educational needs. Custody remains with the mother." Victory had tasted sweeter than any recipe in her grandmother's collection. But now, faced with Sam's unexpected return, Madison wondered if winning the legal battle had only prepared her for a more complex war. "Maddie," Sam said, using the pet name that once made her heart flutter, "I know I don't have the right to ask, but I need to come home." He looked older, thinner, his trademark confidence replaced by something that might have been humility. The children clustered behind Madison, Ruby and Jimmy forming a protective barrier, the younger ones peering around their siblings with curiosity and caution. "Where have you been?" 8-year-old Katie asked, her fearless nature intact despite everything. Sam's eyes filled with tears. "Learning what I lost, sweetheart. Learning what really matters." Madison felt the familiar tug of sympathy that had trapped her for 14 years. This broken man asking for forgiveness, promising change, swearing he'd learned his lesson. Part of her, the part that remembered falling in love with his dreams and charm, wanted to believe him. But a larger part, the part forged in pre-dawn kitchens and custody hearings, recognized the pattern. Sam didn't want to rebuild their family. He wanted to reclaim his position as head of a family that had learned to thrive without him. "We'll talk," Madison said finally, "after the children are in bed." The reckoning was coming, and this time Madison knew exactly who she was coming, and this time Madison knew exactly who she was. But as she stood in the kitchen of what would soon become Madison's kitchen, her first official storefront, 12 months after Sam's second departure, she barely recognized the woman she'd become. Sam had lasted exactly 3 weeks after his return. 3 weeks of promising change while slipping out to poker games. 3 weeks of trying to reassert authority over children who'd learned to respect earned leadership rather than inherited titles. 3 weeks of Madison watching her children's carefully rebuilt sense of security crumble under the weight of his broken promises. The final straw had come when she'd found him rifling through the coffee tin, where she kept the week's catering earnings, muttering about just borrowing money for a sure thing that would set them up for life. The confrontation that followed had been quiet but absolute. "You can stay and be the father they need," Madison had told him, "or you can leave and let them heal, but you cannot keep breaking their hearts every time your promises prove hollow." Sam had chosen to leave. This time, there were no tears from the children, only a collective exhale of relief that spoke volumes about the family they'd become without him. Now, Madison stood, surveying her kingdom. Gleaming commercial ovens, industrial mixers, enough workspace to fulfill the orders that kept multiplying. The Hendersons' anniversary party had led to the Morrison wedding, which led to the county fair contract, which led to wholesale orders from 3 neighboring towns. "Mama, the Louisville Courier wants to do a story about the business," Ruby announced, bursting through the back door with a newspaper tucked under her arm. At 17, she moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd learned to balance college preparation with business partnership. Madison wiped flour-dusted hands on her apron, still amazed by how far they'd come. What kind of story? From abandonment to achievement, local mother builds catering empire, Ruby read. They want to interview you next week. Jimmy looked up from where he was loading delivery boxes into their newly purchased truck, used but reliable, and painted with Madison's Kitchen in cheerful blue letters. Empire seems like a stretch. We're not exactly Coca-Cola. Give it time, Madison said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. What had started as desperate survival had evolved into something she'd never imagined, genuine business ambition. She found herself dreaming not just of keeping her family fed, but of expansion, of employing other women who needed second chances, of building something that would last generations. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. Madison, the Williams Hotel in Louisville. They want to discuss exclusive catering contract for their events. Big money, steady work. Madison felt her pulse quicken. The Williams Hotel represented everything she'd once thought impossible. Respect, financial security, proof that a woman who'd started with nothing but determination could build something remarkable. But it also meant decisions that would change everything. More employees, longer hours, less time with the children who'd already sacrificed so much for their shared survival. When do they want to meet? Madison asked. As she spoke the words, she realized this was more than a business opportunity. This was the moment when survival transformed into legacy, when Madison Huff stopped simply fighting for her family's future and started building it with her own hands. This was the moment when survival transformed into legacy, when Madison Huff stopped simply fighting for her family's future and started building it with her own hands. But as she sat across from Richard Williams III in the opulent conference room of the Williams Hotel, 3 years after Sam's final departure, Madison realized that success came with its own set of impossible choices. Mrs. Huff, Williams said, his manicured fingers steepled across the mahogany table, your reputation precedes you. The governor's wife specifically requested your catering for the charity gala next month. That's quite an endorsement. Madison nodded, trying to project the confidence she'd learned to wear like armor. At 35, she carried herself with the poise of a woman who discovered that survival could transform into strength, that necessity could breed excellence. But beneath the professional exterior, she remained the woman who woke at 3 every morning to knead dough, who counted every penny twice, who worried that one wrong decision could send her family tumbling back into the abyss they'd clawed their way out of. I'm honored by the recommendation, she replied. Madison's Kitchen has built its reputation on quality and reliability. Indeed. Which brings me to my proposal. Williams leaned forward, his smile carrying the particular warmth that preceded lucrative offers. I want to buy your business, Mrs. Huff. Full purchase price of $25,000, plus a management contract that would guarantee you $15,000 annually for the next 5 years. The numbers hit Madison like physical blows. $25,000, more money than she'd ever imagined possessing. $15,000 a year to manage what she'd built, with none of the crushing responsibility of ownership, none of the sleepless nights wondering if she could make payroll, none of the constant fear that one disaster could destroy everything. That's a generous offer, Madison managed. It's fair compensation for what you've built. And frankly, Mrs. Huff, it would solve some practical problems. Running a business of this size requires capital for expansion, connections in the hospitality industry, resources that, frankly, he gestured diplomatically, that might be challenging for someone in your position to access independently. Madison understood the subtext. A woman alone, without family money or social connections, had taken her small operation as far as raw talent and determination could carry it. To compete at the next level, to secure contracts with major hotels and corporations, she would need resources she didn't possess and couldn't imagine acquiring. I'd need time to consider. Of course, but I should mention that this offer has an expiration date. We're prepared to finalize the deal within 2 weeks, or we'll be pursuing other options. The drive home gave Madison time to process the magnitude of what Williams had offered. financial security that would guarantee her children's futures. College tuition for Ruby, who'd deferred her scholarship twice to help with the business. Opportunities for Jimmy, who'd developed a sharp business mind but deserved the chance to choose his own path, rather than being trapped by family necessity. But as she pulled into the driveway of the house they'd nearly lost, Madison saw Ruby waiting on the porch with an envelope in her hands, her face bright with excitement. "Mama, it came!" Ruby waved the letter like a victory flag. "The scholarship! Full ride to the University of Kentucky, with a spot in their business program." Madison's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. Ruby's scholarship, the opportunity her brilliant daughter had earned through sheer academic excellence, despite working 18-hour days. The chance for education that Madison had never had, that Ruby deserved more than breath itself. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Madison said, embracing her daughter. "When would you start?" "Fall semester." "But Mama," Ruby's expression grew troubled, "I can't leave now, not with the Williams contract and the expansion plans. The business needs nothing more than it needs you to have your own life," Madison interrupted firmly. "You're going to college, Ruby. That's not negotiable." That evening, Madison called a family meeting. The older children gathered around the kitchen table where so many crucial decisions had been made, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the moment. Jimmy, now 17 and already showing signs of the man he'd become. Maggie, 15, and possessed of a quiet wisdom that reminded Madison of her grandmother. Tommy, 13 and still dreamy but with an artist's eye for beauty that had begun translating into practical skills in food presentation. "I've been offered a chance to sell the business," Madison began, watching their faces carefully. "It would mean financial security for all of us. College funds, a comfortable life, freedom from the constant worry about making ends meet." "But you'd lose everything you built," Jimmy said immediately. "Everything we built together." "I'd lose ownership," Madison corrected. "I'd still manage the operation, still be involved in the day-to-day decisions." "Working for someone else," Ruby said quietly. "Taking orders instead of giving them." Madison looked at her children, these young people who'd sacrificed their childhoods to help build something remarkable, who'd learned lessons about resilience and determination that no classroom could teach. Ruby deserved the freedom to pursue her education without guilt. Jimmy deserved the chance to choose his own path rather than feeling obligated to carry on something that had begun as desperate survival. "I want you all to understand something," Madison said. "This business started because we had no choice. It grew because we had no choice. But you, all of you have choices now. Ruby, you're going to college, and that's final. Jimmy, you can join me in expanding the business, or you can pursue your own dreams. The same goes for all of you as you get older." "What do you want to do, Mama?" Maggie asked. Madison thought of her grandmother's hands kneading bread, of the pride she felt when customers praised her cooking, of the satisfaction that came from building something from nothing. She thought of the women she'd begun employing, other mothers who needed second chances, who'd found dignity and purpose in honest work. "I want to prove that what we've built can last," she said finally. "I want to show that determination and quality can compete with inherited wealth and social connections, but not at the cost of your futures." Ruby reached across the table and took Madison's hand. "Mama, you taught us that family means fighting for each other. Well, I'm fighting for you to keep what you've earned. I'll go to college, but I'll also come home every weekend to help. This is our legacy, not just yours." Jimmy nodded firmly. "Besides, someone needs to handle the business side while you focus on the cooking. I'm good with numbers, and I'm learning the customer relations part." Looking around the table at these remarkable young people she'd raised, Madison felt a certainty settle in her chest. Williams's offer was tempting, but it was also a trap. Trading ownership for security, independence for comfort, the chance to build something lasting for the guarantee of something safe. "Then we expand," Madison said. "We compete. We prove that Madison's Kitchen can stand with any business in this state." As her children erupted in cheers and began planning their assault on the Louisville catering market, Madison felt the last vestiges of the frightened, dependent woman she'd once been finally disappear. In her place stood someone she'd never imagined becoming: an entrepreneur, a risk-taker, a woman who believed her dreams were worth fighting for. The Williams Hotel would have to find another caterer. Madison Huff was building an empire. The Williams Hotel would have to find another caterer. Madison Huff was building an empire. 5 years after Sam's final departure, that empire had grown beyond Madison's wildest imagination, transforming not just her family's circumstances but the very fabric of their small Kentucky town. Madison stood at the podium in the high school gymnasium, looking out at the faces of her community gathered for the monthly town council meeting. At 40, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd learned that true leadership came not from demanding respect, but from earning it through service. The woman who'd once trembled before landlords and lawyers now fielded questions about zoning ordinances and economic development with the same practical competence she brought to managing a business that employed 32 people. The proposed expansion of Madison's Kitchen will create an additional 15 jobs, she reported to the assembled crowd. But more importantly, it will establish our community as a destination for culinary tourism. We've already received inquiries from food writers in Louisville and Lexington. From her seat in the front row, Ruby smiled with pride that made Madison's heart swell. Now 21 and in her senior year at the University of Kentucky, Ruby had fulfilled every promise of her potential, while maintaining her role as Madison's closest advisor. Her business degree, earned while commuting home every weekend to help with operations, had provided the theoretical framework for Madison's intuitive understanding of customer service and quality control. Beside Ruby sat Jimmy, 19, and already showing signs of becoming the natural leader Madison had always sensed in him. He'd chosen to forego college in favor of apprenticing directly in the business, and his instincts for marketing and customer relations had proven invaluable. The young man who'd once channeled his anger into schoolyard fights now directed that same fierce protectiveness toward building something that would employ and support other families facing their own struggles. "Mrs. Huff," called out Harold Peterson from the back of the room, "what about the scholarship fund you mentioned last month?" Madison felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. The Madison Huff Foundation for Single Mothers, established with the first significant profits from her expanded operation, had already provided educational assistance to 6 women in their county and 3 in neighboring communities. The foundation will award its first 4-year scholarship next month, Madison announced. It's designed specifically for mothers who found themselves suddenly responsible for supporting their families alone. Because I learned something important during my own struggles, potential doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Sometimes it just needs a little support to flourish. The applause that followed was genuine, warm, and Madison felt the satisfaction that came from transforming personal pain into public good. Every woman who received assistance through her foundation was proof that abandonment didn't have to mean defeat, that single mothers weren't burdens on their communities, but resources waiting to be unleashed. After the meeting, Madison walked the familiar streets of her hometown, noting the changes that success had brought. The downtown area, once dotted with empty storefronts, now bustled with activity. 3 new restaurants had opened to serve the tourists who came seeking, quote, authentic Kentucky cuisine. The bed and breakfast had expanded twice. Young people who'd once fled to Louisville or Lexington were finding reasons to stay, to build careers in a place that finally offered opportunities worth pursuing. But it was the personal changes that struck Madison most deeply. The woman who'd once crossed the street to avoid confronting creditors now walked these sidewalks as someone people sought out for advice and assistance. The abandoned wife who'd feared losing her children now served as a mentor to other women facing similar crises. "Madison!" Mrs. Chen's voice called from the entrance to her diner, now expanded and renovated but still serving as the unofficial community gathering place. At 70, Dorothy Chen moved more slowly, but retained the sharp business acumen that had recognized Madison's potential when no one else saw anything but desperation. "How did the council meeting go?" Dorothy asked as Madison approached. "Approved the expansion unanimously," Madison replied. "Construction starts next month." "Good. This town needs what you're building. Not just jobs. Hope." You show people that circumstances don't define destiny. As they talked, Madison noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the street. Sam walked with the hesitant gait of someone unsure of his welcome, his once confident stride replaced by something that looked almost like shame. At 43, he appeared older than his years, his face bearing the lines of disappointment and regret. "Madison," he said, stopping at a careful distance. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Dorothy Chen studied Sam with the sharp assessment of someone who'd witnessed both his abandonment and Madison's rise. "I'll be inside if you need anything," she said pointedly, before disappearing into her diner. Madison faced her former husband, this man who'd once been the center of her world, with the calm detachment of someone who'd learned to measure people by their actions, rather than their promises. "Sam," she acknowledged, "what brings you back?" "I heard about your success, about the council position, the business expansion. I'm proud of you, Maddie." The old nickname no longer carried the power to soften her resolve. "Thank you, how are you doing?" Sam's laugh was bitter, self-aware. "Not well. Haven't been well for a long time. The gambling. It got worse after I left. Lost everything, ended up in some dark places. I've been sober for 8 months now, going to meetings, trying to figure out how to be a better man." Madison waited, recognizing the pattern of contrition she'd heard before, but noting something different in his delivery. This wasn't the practiced charm of someone seeking advantage. This was the raw honesty of someone who'd hit bottom and was slowly climbing back toward the light. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sam continued. "I know I forfeited that right years ago. But I wanted you to know that watching what you've accomplished, seeing how you've raised our children, it's made me understand what I threw away. Not just the family, but the chance to be part of something meaningful." "The children have grown up well," Madison said carefully. "Ruby's graduating from college next month. Jimmy's become an exceptional young businessman. All of them are thriving. Because of you, despite me." Sam's voice carried a weight of regret that seemed genuine. "I won't ask to see them if they don't want to see me. I needed you to know that I finally understand the difference between a man and a father, between making promises and keeping them." Madison studied this broken version of the man she'd once loved, feeling something she hadn't expected. Pity rather than anger, sadness rather than resentment. Sam's abandonment had been devastating, but it had also been liberation. It had forced her to discover strengths she'd never known she possessed, to build a life based on her own capabilities rather than someone else's limitations. "I hope you find peace, Sam," she said finally. "I hope you find a way to build something worthwhile with whatever time you have left." As Sam walked away, toward what future Madison couldn't guess, she felt the final chapter of their shared story closing. Not with dramatic confrontation or emotional reconciliation, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd learned that the greatest revenge against those who abandoned you was building a life so meaningful that their absence became irrelevant. Madison Huff had become exactly who she was meant to be: a mother, a leader, a pillar of her community, and a woman who understood that true strength came not from never falling, but from choosing to rise every single time. The empire she'd built wasn't measured just in dollars or employees or expansion plans. It was measured in the lives she'd touched, the example she'd set, and the proof she offered every day that determination and dignity could triumph over any circumstance. Her legacy was already secure, written in the success of her children and the gratitude of her community. Everything else was just the beginning. Her legacy was already secure, written in the success of her children and the gratitude of her community. Everything else was just the beginning. But as Madison stood in the garden behind the home she'd once feared losing, watching her first grandchild take tentative steps across the grass where her own children had played, she realized that beginnings and endings were just different faces of the same eternal cycle. 10 years had passed since Sam's final visit, 15 since his original abandonment. The woman who'd once counted $17.32 as her entire fortune now oversaw a business empire that employed over 200 people across 3 counties. Madison's kitchen had evolved into Madison's hospitality group: restaurants, catering, a culinary school, and the food processing plant that distributed her grandmother's recipes to grocery stores throughout the Southeast. But success measured in dollars paled beside the wealth that surrounded her today. Ruby, now 31, had returned from her MBA program to become the company's chief operating officer, bringing modern business practices to the enterprise her mother had built on intuition and determination. Her marriage to David, a fellow business graduate, had produced 2 children who called Madison Grandmama and filled her home with the same chaotic joy that had once echoed through rooms where 12 siblings learned to navigate the world together. Jimmy, 29 and every inch the natural leader Madison had always known he'd become, managed the company's expansion into new markets, while maintaining the personal touch that had made their original success possible. His wife Sarah, a teacher who understood the value of family bonds forged in crisis, had given Madison 3 more grandchildren who treated the sprawling compound of houses on what had once been their single property as their personal kingdom. "Grandmama, tell us the story again," 8-year-old Emma demanded, settling onto Madison's lap with the imperious confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "About how you saved everybody with biscuits," Madison laughed, gathering Emma closer while keeping one eye on the other grandchildren scattered around the yard. At 55, she moved with the careful grace of someone whose body bore the accumulated weight of decades spent lifting, stirring, and building. Her hands, once soft from 14 years of dependent housewife duties, now carried permanent flour stains and small scars from countless hours spent creating sustenance for others. "It wasn't just biscuits," Madison corrected gently. "It was remembering who I was, who we all were, underneath the fear." As she began the familiar tale, simplified for young ears but no less true for the editing, Madison caught sight of movement near the main house. Maggie, now 27 and a pediatric nurse, emerged from the kitchen, carrying the afternoon's baking project. Even in her professional life, Maggie had found ways to nurture and heal, her childhood role as family peacemaker translating into a career spent caring for other people's children. Behind Maggie came Tommy, 25, and finally able to pursue his artistic dreams without the weight of family survival on his shoulders. His illustrations graced the covers of children's books published nationwide, and his painting studio occupied the converted barn, where Sam had once stored tools he never used. Tommy's art captured the beauty he'd learned to see, even in the darkest moments, his sensitive nature no longer a liability but a gift that brought joy to thousands of young readers. The middle children, Katie, Patty, Bobby, Lizzie, had spread across the country pursuing their own dreams, but they returned faithfully for these family gatherings that had become tradition. Katie, the fearless 8-year-old who'd refused to be ashamed of their circumstances, now worked as a civil rights lawyer in Atlanta, her courage channeled into fighting for families facing the same kinds of discrimination and judgment Madison's family had once endured. Patty had become a teacher, carrying forward the lessons about resilience and determination that had shaped her childhood. Bobby's natural charm had made him a successful salesman, though he credited his ability to connect with people to years spent learning that genuine warmth was more valuable than superficial polish. Lizzie, the quiet observer, had become a social worker, using her gift for reading unspoken pain to help other families navigate crisis. Even the youngest ones had found their paths. Danny, now 22, managed the company's charitable foundation, his childhood experience of being cared for by many hands translating into a gift for organizing community support. And Sarah, baby Sarah, who'd never known her father's presence as anything but absence, had just graduated from culinary school, preparing to carry her grandmother's recipes into another generation, while adding her own innovations to the family legacy. "Mrs. Madison!" The voice calling from the edge of the property belonged to Dorothy Chen, now 80, and moving with careful deliberation, but still sharp as the day she'd first tasted Madison's biscuits. "I brought something for you." Dorothy approached carrying a wooden box that Madison recognized immediately, her own grandmother's recipe collection, which she'd given to Dorothy years ago, when the older woman expressed interest in adding some Southern touches to her diner's menu. "I've been thinking," Dorothy said, settling carefully into the porch chair Madison's children had positioned for her comfort. "These recipes, they're not just food instructions. They're family history." Stories. They deserve better than my old diner kitchen. Madison opened the box with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from emotion. The yellowed index cards looked exactly as they had decades ago, her grandmother's careful handwriting still legible despite years of handling. But now they were accompanied by new cards, Madison's own editions, written in her own hand, documenting the innovations and variations that had built an empire. I want you to write the cookbook, Dorothy continued. Not just recipes, but the stories behind them. How they saved your family, how they built your business, how they represent something larger than food. Madison lifted one of the cards, her grandmother's buttermilk biscuit recipe, the foundation on which everything else had been built. She could almost see Eleanor's hands guiding hers, feel the presence of the woman who'd raised her to be strong enough for anything life might demand. Love and flour, a Kentucky family's recipe for survival, Ruby suggested, appearing at Madison's elbow with the same uncanny timing she'd shown as a teenager. That could be the title. The publisher I've been working with would be very interested, Jimmy added, settling onto the porch steps with his own children climbing onto his lap. Especially with the foundation's work as a tie-in. Every book sold could fund another scholarship. Madison looked around at the faces surrounding her, children and grandchildren, chosen family like Dorothy, employees who'd become extended family through shared purpose. This gathering represented more than business success or financial security. It represented the triumph of love over abandonment, of determination over despair, of the belief that ordinary people could build extraordinary lives if they refused to surrender to circumstances. You know, Madison said slowly, when your grandfather left us, I thought my story was ending. I thought I was too old, too sheltered, too dependent to start over. But you were wrong, Emma said with the absolute certainty of childhood. I was wrong, Madison agreed. I learned that stories don't end when bad things happen. They just change direction. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after the parts that nearly break you. A car pulling into the driveway interrupted the moment, and Madison felt her breath catch as she recognized the figure emerging from the passenger seat. Ida Mae Huff, now 83, and moving with the careful precision of advanced age, approached the house with what looked like genuine humility. Madison hadn't seen Sam's mother in over 5 years, not since the brief, awkward encounter at Sam's funeral. Sam had died quietly in a Louisville boarding house, sober but alone, his gambling debts finally claimed by a heart attack at 51. Madison had attended the funeral not out of lingering love, but out of respect for the man he'd tried to become in his final years, and because her children deserved to say goodbye to the father who'd failed them. Madison, Ida Mae said, her voice carrying none of the condescension that had once made it a weapon. I hope I'm not intruding. Madison stood slowly, aware of her children and grandchildren watching with protective alertness. Mrs. Huff. This is unexpected. I've been thinking about Sam's funeral, about the things you said about forgiveness and second chances. I've been thinking about the mistakes I made, the judgment I passed, the way I tried to take your children because I thought money was more important than love. Ida Mae's voice wavered with what sounded like genuine emotion. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About what those children needed. About what constitutes a real family. Madison studied the older woman, seeing not the imperious society matron who'd once threatened her family, but a frail human being carrying the weight of decades' worth of regret. Would you like some tea? Madison offered, the southern hospitality her grandmother had drilled into her overriding any lingering resentment. That would be very kind. As they settled on the porch with glasses of sweet tea and plates of cookies baked by grandchildren who'd inherited both the recipe and the tradition, Ida Mae looked around at the evidence of Madison's success with what appeared to be genuine wonder. I read about your business in the newspapers, she said. About the foundation, the culinary school, all of it. Samuel would have been so proud. Sam was proud, Madison replied quietly. He told me so the last time I saw him. He'd learned to see past his own failures to recognize what his children had become. What you helped them become, Ida Mae corrected. Madison, I spent years believing that proper family meant the right social connections, the best schools, the finest opportunities. But watching your children today, seeing the way they care for each other and for your grandchildren, this is what family really looks like. Madison felt tears prick at her eyes, not for the pain of old wounds, but for the healing that seemed possible, even after decades of separation and resentment. Mrs. Huff, would you like to stay for dinner? The whole family will be here, and there's always room for one more at our table. Ida May's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I would be honored. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Madison watched 3 generations of her family interact with the woman who'd once tried to tear them apart. Her grandchildren, with the easy acceptance of childhood, included Ida May in their games and conversations. Her own children, following Madison's lead, treated their former adversary with courtesy that gradually warmed into something approaching affection. But it was during the after-dinner cleanup, when Madison found herself alone in the kitchen with Ruby and Jimmy, that the full weight of the day's significance settled over her. Are you okay with this, Mama? Ruby asked, loading dishes into the industrial dishwasher that had replaced the old sink where Madison had once washed plates by hand, while wondering how she'd feed her family the next day. I'm more than okay, Madison replied. I'm grateful, not for the pain she caused, that was real and it was wrong, but for the reminder that people can change, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it does allow healing. Jimmy wrapped his arms around his mother from behind, still the protective boy who'd once channeled his anger into schoolyard fights. You know what I think? What's that? I think Grandmama Eleanor would be proud of the woman you've become. Not just the business success or the community leadership, but this. The way you've learned to build bridges instead of walls, to choose love over bitterness, even when bitterness would be easier. Madison leaned back against her son's solid warmth, feeling the presence of all the women who'd come before her. Her grandmother who'd taught her to be strong, the neighbors who'd shown her kindness, the employees who'd trusted her leadership, the customers who'd supported her dreams. Each one had contributed to the person she'd become, to the legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the grandchildren were tucked into beds throughout the compound, Madison sat in her study working on the first pages of what would become her cookbook. But instead of starting with recipes, she found herself writing about choices. The choice to fight rather than surrender, to build rather than merely survive, to see possibility where others saw only limitation. The secret ingredient in every recipe, she wrote, isn't something you can buy at any store or learn from any cookbook. It's the belief that whatever you're facing, no matter how impossible it seems, you have within you everything you need to create something beautiful. Outside her window, the garden where her grandchildren played stretched toward the horizon, its neat rows a testament to the truth that growth required both patience and persistence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that determination and love could overcome any obstacle. But tonight, Madison Huff sat in the home she'd saved with flour and courage, surrounded by the family she'd fought to keep together, writing the story that would ensure her grandmother's recipes, and the woman who'd made them famous, would never be forgotten. The legacy lived on, not just in buildings or bank accounts or business empire, but in the hearts and hands of people who'd learned that the most important recipe of all was the one for never giving up. And that recipe, Madison knew, would feed generations yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,